for our Exploring Leadership session. If anybody out there I haven't met, apologies for that. My name is Paul Sheeran, Chief Exec at Scottish Engineering. And yeah, we've got a nice, light, easy way to ease into Friday with our leadership session this morning. As you're joining, sort of general housekeeping for today is going to be mics on mute and cameras off, unless if we come to you for a question, which we'd really welcome, then please do stick the camera on and come off mute, and we'd be glad to hear from you then. You can put any questions in chat. We'll keep an eye on that as we go along, and if it's pertinent to the discussion, we'll find a break and stop it. But we'll also have time for questions at the end. I think the session this morning is, well, I think anything around leadership is always absolutely key and spot on. It's at the heart of everything that we do, whether that is recovering from the economic impact of a pandemic, or whether that is improving and driving forward our business, or whether that is working out how we're going to do our part to tackle climate challenge. Leadership is at the heart of everything. And I think this morning's session will be looking at in a way where it's about understanding yourself and self-reflecting, and I think that's a real key part of that. I'll start by giving my thanks to Kathleen. Kathleen Harkins is kindly given her time for the session this morning. Kathleen was introduced to us by our friends at Head Torch, which we're really grateful for. I'm sure you read the introduction we sent out. Kathleen had a long number of years in engineering manufacturing as a learning development person. She was at 15 years, I think, most recently at Leonardo. So she speaks our language, if you like. And thanks for that, Kathleen. And John Penman. John, I was interested to see in our sort of promotional material, John has only been 30 years in engineering manufacturing roles, which means he must have had another career before that, or a big paper round in Fife. But joking aside, John's an absolute shining example of the pathway that can be had from apprenticeship. John started as an apprenticeship and now is managing director and part owner of Fife Fabrications and running a really nice business over there. So a really good candidate for this talk this morning. With that, I'll stop. Hand over to Kathleen and John. Hope you enjoy the session. Please do ask questions, and we'll come to you in time with those. Kathleen, John, over to you.
Thanks, Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Paul. This is my first session with Scottish Engineering, so it's great to be here today and to see so many faces or little circles with initials as it is that's coming up just now. So just to give you a bit of background on why I'm here and why me to do this session, as Paul said, I've had 15 years in a large corporate engineering manufacturing organisation as L&D business partner, and I've actually been in learning and development for probably over 20 years. I feel like I've been saying over 20 years for a while now, so it must be getting a bit longer than that. But a lot of that time it's been around behavioural skills that I've been supporting, leadership development. And as Paul said there, leadership for me has been pivotal in really every part of the business that I've been in. So I'm really passionate about it. And went self-employed about 18 months ago, but leadership and behavioural change is still the area that really fascinates me, of the impact that it can have. So working in an engineering and manufacturing organisation, I think I've seen loads of great leaders, loads of great managers, some not so good and some, well, pretty poor, shall we say. But exploring why that's the case, I think, is quite interesting. I've seen a lot of engineers that have been brilliant engineers and then they've been promoted into management roles and it's just not worked quite so well for them, and the support and development that they've needed has been pretty significant, understandably, because they're used to being great at what they do, and then they've got to understand what this whole world of leadership's been. So a lot of where I'm coming from, it's about my experience. So I've read some leadership books, and there's all these models out there, and I'm sure many of you have looked at them in some degree or another. But I think for me, it's how does that really impact on the shop floor, in the boardroom? What does it really mean in reality when we get away from a lot of the jargon that's used within leadership. So having left corporate world, I've been doing coaching with a number of different leaders, and I really wanted to explore what it means to be a leader. I think often it's hard for a leader in any sort of role to put their hand up and say, I'm struggling, and what's working well and what's not. And that honesty as a leader, I think, is really important. So rather than standing up just doing a session on leadership today, when I spoke to Paul, we thought it'd be really much more interesting and engaging to do a chat with somebody who has been that journey, who understands leadership, who has been through the ups and downs, which everyone has, and really just explore that a little bit more. So that's when Paul introduced me to John, and we've had a bit of a chat thinking, well, let's just have today's session as a nice chilled Friday morning session where we totally quiz John, no, not really, just a gentle chat with John about his journey, what's worked well, what hasn't, and just looking at some of the key points on leadership. So John, can we start off just by giving, Paul said as much as you've been 30 years, but can you just give us a little bit of background of Fife Fabrications and what your role is?
So my role is Managing Director of Fife Fabrications. Got a number of good friends on the session, and also some good customers that's looked after me after the years. So you know, my role really is to make sure that this business continues. We're 50 years in business next year. We're committed to growing and developing the business, bringing young people into the business. And in reality, I would say most leaders' role is to look for the next generation and nurture talent. And that's what I would say would make a good leader, you know, keeping the business successful so that it creates opportunities for the next generations. Mm-hmm. So that's always been, you know, front and centre in my thoughts as I move through the business, and eventually, obviously, part owning the business and becoming managing director. And the cultures over 32 years have changed significantly. The last few years, you know, we've moved the culture and the ethos of the business on again. And I think that's important as new generations join us. You know, people in my age think about business and engineering in a certain way, but young people at 16, 17 and 18 joining us as apprentices, they come from a different generation. Technology to them, you know, is social media, good communication, and, you know, being listened to. Where probably in my day, when I started my apprenticeship, you came in the morning, you did what you were told, and you had opinion when you eventually became a tradesman. So the world has changed quite a lot over those years. But I think most successful businesses are successful one because, you know, they have a good product, or, you know, they provide good service and quality. But a good business has good people as well, and that's key to success, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in my time, Joan, I think it can often be the case that where things fall down is people can be so focused on the product and the process, the people bit can slip a little bit. I think I've seen that where leadership can fall down. I'm interested to go back. So you talked about back 30 years ago-ish when you started as an apprentice. Can you talk a bit about that first role that you had where you first went into a management position and what that was like for you?
Yeah, well, you know, first role was obviously shop floor based, so it was managing products and quality through in certain projects. So, you know, the days of spreadsheets and technology, it was you know, pieces of paper and communication, and you still had a thought process that was, you know, just tell someone what to do and they'll do it. You know, there was probably very little coaching and mentoring. There was very little, you know, engagement, I would say. I mean, we're an SME. We sit circa around. We've always sat around about between 100 and 130 people. So not the largest organisation, but not the smallest, but still quite complex. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it was quite challenging. You know, saying, there you go and manage that element of the business, and make sure it's a success.
Yeah. So step one into that management role was really about managing the product and getting people to do. So you're saying at that point it was like telling them to go and do that.
Yeah.
So I again, that's something I've seen a lot, is that first step is you're used to doing the job, then you take that shift to telling people to do the job and managing the product with that. So that, how did that grow and evolve for you as a new manager?
I think as I move through the different roles, it's almost a case that, as you said, an engineer, has in his head or their head, I'm going to make this product. This is how it starts as some raw material and it ends as a finished product that you invoice. And almost as you grow through the management roles, in a way, you've almost to reprogram your head a little bit. That it's not a product, it's people, it's people's lives, it's the culture of your business, it's some of the elements you can't really touch, whereas a product you could physically touch it generally. But when you're leading a high number of people, that there's parts of the business. It's how does it feel when you look at it? How does it feel when you're talking to people? Does it feel the way that you think it should be? So it's almost a case of you've got to reprogram your brain a little bit, I would say.
So how do you do that as an engineer who you recognise that shift of it's actually bigger than the product and it's the people, and there's just an emotional connection there that you're talking about that, and you reprogrammed your mind really as an engineer, the reprogramming part. So how did you get the support to do that? Did you get training? How did you work out how to do that?
I think quite a lot of training, and a lot of people over my careers helped me. Having a good network, and as you meet people, you see how they run good businesses, how they treat people properly. I think also as well, it's good to make mistakes. No one's right every time they make a decision. So I think the important thing for a leader is to consider when they have made a mistake and reflect on why did it go wrong, and if you were making a similar decision in the future, what would you do differently? And I think we all make decisions, and you look back and it could be about a car crash both in terms of the business, but more importantly people. And I think you have to become more sensitive that it is people's lives you're affecting with decisions. And I would say the biggest thing I've learned over the years, generally people like honesty. So be honest with people, be truthful with people. People generally could sense when you're being false to them. So a good dose of honesty is always good. And I think I'm on my 9th recession. Things have been bad. We've had to make payoffs, but I think all the time you can only be honest with people and say, it's bad this time, but we'll come through it. Fortunately, we're losing some colleagues, but hopefully when we come through it and we start to return to normal, we'll be getting these colleagues back. But if you just continually, ignore people, they will either, not do a very good job for you when they're here, or they'll probably go and find a better business to work for.
So it sounds, John, like although there was some training that you said at the start of that it's been connecting with people with other experiences that it sounds like a lot of your learnings come from. And once you've made a mistake, that's how you learn, because that's not stuff that happens in a training room particularly, does it?
No. I would say that, not everything that you need to know to be a good leader can be put in a book. You've got to put into perspective with where you work, the community you work in. We operate in a former mining community, and many of our employees came out of the mining industry or seen what happened post the industrial decline. So one size doesn't fit all. Something that works in one part of the country may not work in another. But elements of that, if you take that and you see it working, take that and shape it into a way that works for your business and works for you.
Yeah, I think that's. I think I've seen that even in a large corporate organisation where I've been. There's different lines of business, and there's different cultures almost within the different lines of business. So whether it's geographically, whatever it may be, I think that recognise and understanding the mindset of the group of people you're working with, and great example there when you're looking at an ex-mining community from that as well. I'm interested to know, John, with when you said about making mistakes, have you got any experiences you could share with us of the past that you're comfortable to do with? You have made that mistake and it's been like, oh no, that's a decision I wish I hadn't made, and just talk us through that at all.
Yeah, probably the biggest mistake most people would make is, we all hire people, and sometimes because you have hired that person, you almost feel required that that person has to be a success. And I would say over the course of my career, I've perhaps hired people that, I thought would be good in a job, but it didn't work out, and I wasn't honest with myself or with them, and I perhaps kept them with the business too long, and it did nothing for them, and it did nothing for the business or for me. So I think the biggest mistake is probably a few people I've unfortunately hired and had to let go, but perhaps haven't had the conversation early enough when they've been with the business. Made a few mistakes with customers in my sales day, but luckily most of them have been considerate. But you mellow a bit as you grow older. In your 30s you're a bit more rash, and I think it's just a case of taking that step back. And I think someone, I think it says to you when we had our chat, someone once says to me, you have 2 ears in one mouth, use them in that proportion is always a good idea. And listen twice as much as you speak is generally a good plan.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure as you're talking here, John, there'll be people that are listening in that will be able to relate to what you're saying as well. When you've made those mistakes, how have you managed it? So if you do something wrong that you think or you regret, how do you go about resolving that as a leader?
I think the first thing is to put your hand up and say, you want to know something? Wrong call. That's the best starting point is to admit you've done something wrong, because if you're unable to admit that you've made a mistake, how do you expect people who are working on the production line and we're continually saying if something goes wrong, let us know or ask a question? So if they don't see managers or leaders or supervisors above them being able and honest enough to say got it wrong, then your culture is already wrong, because they will never have the opportunity, or they won't feel comfortable to equally admit when something's went wrong in a process or something they've done wrong. So if you preach it at the top, it has to be the same as what you're expecting at the bottom, I would say.
Yeah. And how do you encourage your management team, so your reports and through the organisation, how do you encourage them and make them feel comfortable enough to be able to say, you know what, I made a mistake?
Well, at a senior level, we have a weekly, debrief for the what happened in the previous week. What does the next few weeks look like? What was good, what was bad, and I think it's generally creating that culture that you say that you then push through into tier 1, into tier 2, and I do the monthly team briefs through the plant, which is easier because obviously we've only got just over 100 people. But I think being seen in the plant, walking the plant, being open to be stopped and asked a question, and in most cases, what I'll say is I'll answer it as best as I can within the commercial, constraints, and generally most people will accept there's, stuff you'll be able to tell them, and there's stuff that you won't be able to tell them. But I think just having that culture of openness, and also, having that to say, no, I've explained it. I think I've explained it well, and this is the direction we're going. And I think we spoke about it when we chat, me, you, and Paul chat. If you imagine it's like a bus journey, and what you're trying to do is get everyone on the bus, and they actually want to be to go to the destination where that bus is going, and it's identifying early if there's people who unfortunately are on that bus who should perhaps be on a different bus going in a different direction.
I love the bus analogy. I just think I love metaphors. I think metaphors can be so powerful anyway. But that on the bus, and even just with what you're saying there, that just makes me think about when you've made the wrong decision about people. All you're doing is stopping the bus and sending them off in a different direction. It's a nicer way to look at it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing pleasant about letting someone go, whether it's through redundancy or because they're not fitting in. But we're all human beings. We should treat people the way we expect to be treated.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that stood out for me there as well is when you're saying about the honesty. One of the things to me that's fundamental for a leader, it's non-negotiable, is trust. And when I've seen different managers and leaders put their hand up saying, I got it wrong, the trust that engenders is huge. I've seen various examples where leaders have hidden from that because for a number of reasons they've maybe not got the confidence, they don't feel secure enough to be able to do that. And we talk a lot now, and it's more in the forefront, we talk about psychological safety now. And I think a lot of these words that are coming out, like psychological safety, are nice terms for some of these things that you're already talking about, John, about creating that environment and creating that culture where it's okay to say, I got it wrong, and not to feel it's going to cause issues as well. So what else do you think you do in your organisation to build that trust in the leadership team?
I think it's having an open door, having a listening ear. People have good days and bad days, even leaders, and I think that's probably one of the key things as well. Leading a business could be a lonely seat, so make sure you have a good network of people you can speak to, bounce ideas off. Otherwise, you could get very bound up, and your ideas are always right, and you can end up in a real mess. So you also need to create a good network and a good sounding boards, because you have to look after yourself if you're looking after your people. And it's important, I think, from top to bottom, not only creating the environment for your people, but also keep creating an environment for yourself, to have that space to think away for the business.
Yeah, I think that's where organisations like Scottish Engineering, where you've got this opportunity to meet peers, is fantastic. I'm interested just on the back of what you said there then, John, about the open door policy and always there to listen. When we look over the past year, we can't not talk about the pandemic and the impact that's had, and there's a lot about supporting people's mental health and such through this, but that, I think, I've seen everybody's looking for the leader to give that support, but as you rightly said there, how do you look after your own? So what have you done over the past year or so for yourself, for your team, and for the organisation to really manage that?
Well, I think like most businesses, on the 23rd of March, it was, you had walked all the way to the cliff edge, and you went, what does that look like? And Paul and the team at Scottish Engineering, customers, it was regular calls to say, are we closing? Are we staying open? What do we make that's critical national infrastructure? But I think the important thing, we went to almost daily meetings with the team. We remained open, following the guidelines, split the shifts, but I was communicating with every employee the reasons why we were remaining open, and it wasn't just to make money. It was, about 60% of what we made was required for critical national infrastructure sectors. But the one thing, it wasn't masses of information, because I think everyone was going home, and 24/7 there was news, and most of it was bad. So I think everyone was just looking for, can you tell me what it'll look like? And no one could answer that. But the one thing I said to everyone, and continue to say, was that Fife Fab will remain open safely. My daughter's 14 at the time, and it says the day that I felt that Fife Fab wasn't safe to bring my daughter in, should she want to come in and work, would be the day that we wouldn't operate. And I think if you bring it down to something that everybody understands, I feel it's safe for a family member. Hence why I'm coming in every day, and we're still bringing everyone in, but we're 2 metre social distancing. You know, we've now got 3 shifts where we're doing things differently. I think if you keep things simple, everyone already had all the information about COVID, you know, basically 24/7. And it was just a case of nurturing and making sure that the management team and the supervisors equally, you know, their main role was to, you know, if you like, socially distance, put a hand around everybody's shoulders every moment of the day to get them through it.
Yeah, I think that's I think that sounds like it's really back to the message that you're giving throughout there. It's that people first, isn't it? Everything around the people. And again, you said there about openness, and you talked about there earlier as well with regards to being as open as you possibly can, and why you're doing the things you're doing, which I've seen where that can go wrong as well, because yes, there's things you can't share for whatever reasons with all your employees, but what I'm hearing you say is you're telling them why you can't share it too. And I've seen, I think in every organisation I've worked with, there's issues. They will always say we're rubbish at communication, or that's the area we need to improve. But what it tends to be is because the leaders don't say why. They'll give the information or not. And I think that can be quite powerful. And it sounds like through the pandemic, that why has been important for you as well.
Yeah, I think it's been important to, you know, everyone's life has been, you know, turned upside down, and no one had the right answer, you know. So it was leveraging off the information that Paul and the team was giving us, speaking with our customers on a regular basis, and as I said, you know, changing your working day from 80% doing the strategic leadership stuff to probably doing 80% of the people stuff. Because it was the people that needed the most attention at that time. Yeah,
and that's one, I think it's spot on. I really like the way you're saying that. The challenge that I've seen over the years is making that shift, especially when I look at engineers who are technically minded by nature, and can be, I'm being very general here, so people can feel free to challenge me. But it would be 80% is technical, process driven. And that shift to make that 80% people.
Well, we lost Kathleen there for a minute, so hopefully she'll join back in a second. Do you know what, John? Oh, Kathleen's coming back on now.
Sorry, somebody kicked me out there, I think. I don't know, did you not like what I was asking you there, John?
I never touched it.
What was coming?
No, I'm good. I've not touched anything.
I think it was the point when you were starting to throw engineers under the bus for their 80% left brain.
That's what it was. Engineers are rubbish. No, I love engineers. That's why I worked with them for so long. But yeah, what I spent a lot of my time doing in my previous role was really supporting engineers that are in a management role to help make that shift from the focus being 80% process to 80% people, partly because the stuff they really loved was the engineering bits, and the bit that was more challenging was the people aspect. So what often, and at times, it might not be that an engineer is naturally thinking about interpersonal skills in the same way as they're thinking about technical skills. So I hope I'm not throwing engineers under the bus with that. But I think that's where I would run a training course for leadership, and we'd talk about things like motivation and what drives people and how you deal with change. And the theory of that, brilliant, they're absolutely on it. How you take that into the workplace and actually make that shift to being the focus on people is, I've seen as really tough. And we then can start to say, oh, that manager's not performing as well as they should be, but we've not given them that support. So I'm interested, because I'm sure there's others that are on the call today that can relate to that around making that engineer more people focused. Is there any tips or thoughts around that, John, that you could explore where you've seen it work well or not?
I think in a way, going out and networking, because possibly you've been promoted into a management post because you've come through that business. So potentially you've only seen that business, and you know, going out and networking, the Scottish Engineering Network, you know, when we were allowed to visit other companies, and meeting and talking to people like what we're doing today and saying, you know, I tried this, it didn't work great, but there was a part of it worked good. And anything that, you know, it's a success, it's probably a flavour of something that's been a success in the past, and someone's seen it or, you know, reinvented it slightly, or what is the COVID word? Repurposed. You know, I don't think it's overly rocket science. Many of the things to be a good leader are just generally sensible.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point, because when I look at, again, from a large corporate that I've been in already, so I guess it's different but the same, and depending on the size of the organisation, what I've seen is exactly that. So the engineer becomes the lead engineer, becomes the engineering manager. Their role models are the ones that are in the hierarchy before them. So they're the people that have been through the same route of being an engineer and then moving into manager, and it probably is quite insular. They're not necessarily getting the exposure or looking out. So their role models are people like them. So looking at that, you don't train that, do you? It's about how you go out, and I think that networking.
Yeah, I mean, it's culture. I mean, we've probably done a big cultural change in the last few years. You know, just with the new direction the company was going in. And because, you know, we're bringing more and more young people in, and it's a freshness, and you've got to think about the message that worked 5 years ago probably won't make any sense to someone joining us now at 16 or 17, and almost definitely won't sound the same post-COVID. You know, who would ever have dreamed that, you know, we talk about 3 and 2, you know, home working, you know, we're just in a different world. I think the world is going to be different, and yeah, I mean, hopefully unemployment levels don't go to what they were projected to be, you know, and business will return. And if you don't look after people properly and treat them properly, there's a fair chance that good employee will go and find a good business to work for.
Yeah.
And all that effort and money you've spent on that colleague has been wasted.
So you're talking about that cultural shift, and I think, again, I've seen more and more that difference between leading different generations, I guess. So working in an organisation where people have got 30, 40 years service, to these new apprentices and graduates that are coming in, and the differences with that. So what are you doing, John? What have you been doing around that shift in culture to be able to adapt to the
I think the benefit when we bring, you know, our new young apprentices on site is we move them around very early around most sections, and it brings a freshness to each of these sections. It also motivates, we've seen, the employees in those sections, because they feel a pride that they're passing something on to the next generation. You know, their skills and knowledge, and you see the interaction. So I think it's keeping the culture fresh, that it doesn't become stale. Like, you know, they said that last year, it didn't happen, or you've only got a flavour of it. It's just another, you know, it's just another initiative. You know, people will just get bored and switched off. And then the important messages that you really want to go over to everyone, it'll just be lost in the fog.
Yeah. So how have you, I guess, adapted the communication routes then for that? So
I think we've done a few. Obviously, the team briefs, we mix up the team briefs, and what we've done as well is where we would have a cell leader who would normally take that cell continually for the team brief. We now rotate. So, you know, the welding cell leader, you know, next month will take the paint shop team brief, because, you know, slightly putting them out of their comfort zone. But sometimes, you know, things that's worked in the welding area, say for example, could we use any of those things that we've discovered that worked well in the welding and the paint area? So, you know, and also probably the next stage after someone has welded and dressed a component we make is the paint shop. So, you know, it's a good way to get feedback and say, you know, last few weeks parts have not been as good quality, and it's allowing better interaction where perhaps you had the welding area only discussed things with the welding area, didn't really care about the next section, didn't care about the people. Whereas so we tried moving that, and we still do. We rotate the host in the team briefs in each cell.
Yeah, and I think that, again, that's that peer support, peer communication and development that can have such an impact on an individual and how they learn. And you're talking about putting people outside their comfort zone. That's exactly how we learn, don't we? And it's how do you create that environment so that people feel like, I'm going out of my comfort zone here, but if it goes wrong, it'll be okay.
Yeah, I think the important thing when you're explaining, doing, for example, that change, explain why we're trying it, and then, you know, we all do a review. So 4 weeks and 8 weeks, bring those cell leaders in. What worked well? What did you feel uncomfortable with? Was it, you know, speaking? You know, you needed a bit support, moral support. Was there an element that you just weren't comfortable at all with? Health and safety, something like that, and making sure they feel they have someone, a go-to person to leverage off in the areas where they're most uncomfortable.
So it sounds like you use more of a sort of mentoring and coaching culture in there to be able to have that peer network.
Yeah, I think that's how you make it a success, and you know, just don't throw someone into the lion's den and leave them, you know, because you just destroy them.
Yeah. So what about what do you do to look at your own development then, John? What do you're the MD, because you don't need to do any development. You're at the top of the food chain. You must be doing everything perfectly.
Almost certainly no. You know, again, I've been lucky. I've met some really good people during my 30 years, and you know, they've helpful. And when you know, you've got that question that you just can't answer, you have a number of people you would phone and say, think about doing this, and what you're looking for is someone to say, you know, okay, I don't work in an organisation, but I know it just doesn't sound right to me, and just so that you can have a, you know, that bounce off that thought process with you. You know, we went through the buyout 4.5, 5 years ago. It was a torrid 12 months. I know Peter Facina's on call had me. His dad, who's, you know, Allied Vehicles, one of my customers, you know, his dad's phone was like once a week. What should I do? I didn't understand this, you know, and you know, you just very helpful, and you'll find, you know, there's loads of, you know, people like that you tend to find if you help people, people will help you. And there's no one an expert, and there's no one should think that the learning journey has stopped, because that's generally when it'll go wrong.
Yeah, nothing gets in the way of a leader like their own ego, in my experience.
Yeah,
I think it's the one who can't say, help me, I need some advice, what should I do here? And I think that can be where it starts to crumble. Although I would say within that is when I've seen that with a leader in the past, it's often back to the environment that's created for them or the lack of support. So they end up getting a name as maybe not being a great leader. But if you trace it back, you think, well, actually, they've been put in a position where they have been thrown to the lions and various different things as well. So
yeah,
it's that support network around it that sounds like it's worked for you. So you use the sort of mentoring approach.
yeah. I think that's, you know, that's worked for me.
Yeah. And how do you develop your team then? So your first line, as it were, that the leadership with them, how do you support and develop them?
Well, obviously there's the normal standard training that you would expect, but what I also say is, pre-COVID, you know, I was moving him out to go and visit customers, you know, suppliers, other businesses, some of the learning journeys that Scottish Engineering do, is to go out and walk around these other business and speak to the people who work in those, because that's the way I learned. That's the best way for them to learn, to go out and look out, because they're 40 hours per week in Fife Fab. You have the danger if you never go out to Fife Fab, you think this is the way it always has been, the way it always will be, and you'll never make any improvements because you've never seen anything different apart from Fife Fab. You've never spoke to anyone apart from the people in Fife Fab.
Yeah, you need to encourage people to get out of Fife in general at times, really, don't you? Venture out across the country.
We always like to get them to come home, and we draw up the bridges at night to make sure all the Fifers are home safely.
Something that struck a chord with me there when you were talking, John, around you sound from me, and we've only spoken a few times, so you're very much, I would say, driven by the heart. You're driven by people, and that's something you're clearly passionate about. And you said a lot of it's common sense. There's a lot of those things that you're talking about that come really natural to you. So for you, it's common sense. What I would say is I've seen a lot of people who it's not common sense to. It's actually really tough. It's not. And I go a little bit here with, are you driven by the heart or the head, to keep it, from that perspective. And it's not natural necessarily for people to be driven the way you are. What are your thoughts on that? And have you seen anything or any examples where that has been the case?
Yeah, I mean, we'll all have seen someone who, runs a business, and they just, you could chat for them for now to doomsday, and they just won't change. But I would say that, in general, most people, and again, we do quite a bit of work with DYW and young people and working with schools. And again, most of the managers and first line supervisors here are encouraged to go out and work with the schools and that. And I think, it's almost like starting to open a door. I think if you show the successes and good practice and what that could bring to not only your business, but you as a developing leader, it's an easier journey. Sometimes it's just that first step that's hard for people.
Sorry, it's back. It sounds like it's back to that sort of what I've seen as being that insular approach, where it is looking at this one way with a technical mindset. And once you start looking out and seeing things work, it can be successful to do things in different ways and to bring people on the bus with you.
Yeah.
It'd be a lot easier than you just driving the bus and them running to keep up with you.
Yeah, I mean, I say that, like the line managers and supervisors, my role's to hire my replacement and develop my replacement. That's the leader's there to make sure the business success, it's financially successful, the shareholders and the stakeholders are rewarded. But at the end of the day, someone will have to replace me at some point, and it's making sure that there's a talent in the pipeline that can replace everyone.
And I think that message is such a strong one to give from the top, as it were, because what I've seen often with regards to coaching managers is they're almost they can feel threatened by the group that are coming through to replace them. So there's a fear in some ways of, if I develop these people, I'll lose my job because they'll end up being better than me. But all the things that you're talking about there creates an environment of safety for that manager to think, well, actually, no, it's all about bringing through this talent, and all that's going to do is make me look better.
Yeah, and it'll make you look more successful. It'll make you be more successful. Yeah. The better the team, the better the person, the better the manager, the better the leader.
And I think it's the message from the top. I think it keeps coming back to for me. And anybody can be a leader in an organisation without having a job title of leader. But you've got to have the message from the senior team, and not just the message, the living and breathing those values. Because if it's that's whatever you see at the top starts to filter through an organisation as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go back, every organisation's got all these lovely policy statements when we're allowed to visit, ethos statement, but when you visit a company and you go past that statement, you could generally sense, that's just a piece of paper on the wall to tick a box. It's making sure whatever you've put as a statement and a culture and what you believe is followed through right through the business.
Yeah, and I thought I'm trying to remember here, but I can remember when I looked at Fife Fab website, John, and saw in the ethics document it talked about leaders leading by example. You've got a statement in there. I'm not getting the words right, but it was something around that, and your signature's at the bottom of it on the website as well. And I think that to me is quite powerful, rather than a shiny plaque that says.
But, you know, and again, it comes back to your point. It's pointless saying words and, you know, writing down words. If one, you don't believe them, two, you're not going to install them across your team, because, you know, anything else you try or do or in your business will probably fail, because the starting point, you said, you know, we're going to look after people, we're going to develop people, you know, we have a listening culture. If you don't do any of those, the next thing you try will have a fair chance of failing.
Yeah, and we're talking here, I'm going to wind up soon so we can open the floor to some questions, because there's bound to be loads of questions. But I think if you look at what you've talked about over the past 50 minutes or so, it's the people, culture, honesty, trust. Those are the things. At no point really have we talked anything about process and structure. When you're looking at leadership, what really matters, and you've demonstrated that to me really well, is that the people are at the core, and how you look after that. So if I asked you to sum up what great leadership is in 3 words, John, putting you on the spot now, what would it be?
Honesty, trust, and openness.
Yeah, and from what you're saying, that seems to be at the core of you as well. So I'm thinking now we've got another 10 minutes to go. Maybe it would be nice for everyone to put their cameras on, and let's open it up for any comments, challenge, in case people think I have thrown engineers under the bus at all. Any sort of questions from that? Or Paul, has there maybe been any questions come up in the chat?
Yeah, there is. So I'll give a heads up to, Stacey Carruthers has asked a question, but I'm going to ask one first, but I'll give Stacey a chance to find her mute button and camera if she wants to. But I want to ask a question. So you've been asking John questions for 50 minutes. So I want to start with a question for you. So there'll be a lot of people on here who chime with the reality, you know, of engineers who, you know, because they're good at engineering, end up becoming promoted into positions of responsibility where they're responsible for people, and there could be a struggle. So you know, you've had a load of experience, you know, meeting people in that. There must be a common theme where you hear them start to say something and your heart thinks, oh, here we go, the most common mistake is about to repeat itself again. What is that?
It's I have always had a little mantra of people versus process. And what I hear is, when I hear a manager talking about process a lot and not enough people, that's where I think, okay, they're still in engineering mode. And it's that shift that John talked about as moving from to 80% people. So when I hear about process and structure, these words start to flag up for me. And again, it's recognising that that's okay, because that's what they know and that's been their expertise. And it's about a shift there to start bringing people and skills and some of those words John used about culture and such to the forefront, and looking at. And step 1, self-awareness. Over everything is have a look in the mirror and what does that mean for you?
Good stuff. Thank you, Kathleen. Stacey, do you want to ask your question?
Yep. Morning. First of all, thank you. I've enjoyed this morning. It's been very informative. I found though that you're focusing very much on the engineering role. That seems a stupid question because it's Scottish engineering, but like I've been with an engineering company for the past 13 years, but in the finance department. So I'm seen as like a finance manager, but what I'm trying to do is transition to more like a company-wide leader. I'm just wondering what kind of tips you've got for me during that transition.
You know, it's such a good point, Stacey, because I talk about moving from a technical lead to an inspiring leader. And I'm using the terminology a lot, but actually accountants and engineers I find are quite similar. And I'm not going to throw accountants under the bus. Lawyers as well, people who have that real area of expertise of technical, whatever it might be, is very focused on that. And it's that shift to get away from numbers, sums, whatever it is. My tip is, first of all, take a real look in the mirror. And I use a model with anybody that's going into a new role. I use what I call the SILK model. So draw a 4-box grid, and SILK, which is start, improve, lose and keep. And have a look at yourself and what do you say? What do I need to start doing that I'm not currently doing? What am I doing all right but I need to improve? What do I need to lose? Am I an accountant and I need to become a people manager? L for lose and K for keep, because there's a load of stuff you're doing really well and you need to keep it. So that's a good step one.
Yeah, thank you.
John, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, probably I would say there's not any difference, Stacey. You know, it's the same thing. It's whether you're managing numbers or some other department, it comes back to it's about people. You know, do you manage or lead in a way that you would be happy to work in, or a family member would come and work in if you were leading that organisation? If you start with that, back to Kathleen's point, all these things that you would drop will generally be things that are not very nice to people or managing people. So that, you know, any roadmap, you know, is exactly the same. I think, what would you like to make the culture look like if you were leading that organisation, and if you were joining that organisation, would it be a good organisation for you to join?
Okay. Cheers, John. Thanks.
No problem.
Hey, thanks for your question, Stacey. So we're going to go next. We've got a couple of questions from the Scottish Engineering team. Pauline's got a question. Pauline Byrne's got a question. Pauline, do you want to ask your question next?
Sure. My question is, what do you think are the key skills in making leaders inspirational to other people?
You want me to go, Kathleen?
Yeah, go for it, John.
Yeah. Less is more. If you can say it in 1 minute, do it in 1 minute, and don't drag it out to 5.
Short and sweet. Thanks, John. Kathleen, anything you think you'd add to that?
I think it's the bit when I start to see leaders being inspirational is when they start to be more innovative, creative, and more visionary. And when people can see a future and something more exciting, that's when I think people start to be inspired more.
Excellent.
So Pauline, you've now to score your chief executive.
I'll rate him later.
I knew I shouldn't have made that comment about John being on his second career. Oh well, there you go. Lindsay got a really interesting question, which is this, because you talked earlier on, John, about always being honest, and I think this question talks to sometimes when it's difficult for a leader to find that line of when you share things. Lindsay, do you want to ask a question, please?
Yes, this question is aimed more for John, probably, although we'll be interested in Kathleen's views as well after John's spoken. Is that a situation where people are putting you under pressure to make a decision about something, but you realise there's loads of information I need to go away and look at and consider all the pros and cons, or I'm going to do something daft? How do you reconcile that situation?
Well, first thing I always think about, I know I have to make that call to Lindsay to make sure I don't go to court. No, I think, again, coming back to my other point, if you're honest and say, here's the elements of your question I can answer at this moment in time. I appreciate you're desperate for the whole answer. However, there's parts that I either have to go and look up, or there's parts, as you'll appreciate, are business sensitive. And there will be people quite happy with that answer. There will be people who say, well, that's not acceptable. And that's where you have to be in a reasonable manner, explain that currently that's as much information as you can give them.
Yeah, so it's back to that honesty thing again and be open.
If you and don't waffle and whine round the houses trying to get out of the way of the question. Just say, look, this is what I can answer currently. There's another part I'll check and come back to you. Try and get back to you tomorrow. And there's elements, I'm sorry, are business sensitive.
Thank you.
I'd just add into that, Lindsay, that I think as a leader, you will never have all the information you want to have to make a decision. And I think it's where the ability to take risk based on information you have can be an interesting one. And I guess I'm going to talk about engineers again with my experience in that. Engineers tend to, in my experience, like a lot of detail. So often they will never have all the information that they want, and being able, the step to leadership is saying, okay, you know what, I've only got 70% of what I need here, but I'm going to make a decision anyway. And it's back to creating an environment that is okay if that decision turns out not to be the best one, that decision's been made with the information that was had at the time. It was the best decision.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Good stuff. Well, we are at 9:27, and I'm aware of the way these things usually work. Folks might have 9:30 that they're queued up to go to next. So I just want to do my closing thanks. First of all, Kathleen, thank you so much for connecting with us and the discussions which you and John and I had, which were really enjoyable. And thanks especially for doing this morning. For anybody who wants to follow up with Kathleen, she's welcome to do that. And I've stuck her email address in chat, and you get it from there. And if you get stuck or you've missed that in a week's time, just give us a shout, and we'd be happy to connect you with Kathleen. John, thanks again. Really appreciate you. Did you volunteer for this? Was it a real volunteer?
No, I don't think it was, but happy to help.
Yeah, and that's really appreciated. And for everyone else, hope you enjoyed it. Feedback always welcome. You like these kind of sessions, you like to see more of them, let us know, and we'd be glad to follow up with that. And with that, have a good rest of your Friday and a good weekend when it arrives for you. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.